UNLV Arts Worldwide, and this is episode 19, our artist spotlight on artist Tim Bavington. And this is our Dean Nancy Uscher. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Louis. I say this every episode. Aren't we excited? And we really are this time, as well as in every episode, because Tim is both a faculty member in the Department of Art, and he's an alumnus. And in this episode today, he's going to talk about, his evolution as an artist, all the different influences he had, and how it's special to be an artist in Las Vegas, even though he has covered the world. He's world-renowned. His pieces are beautiful. He's so humble. He's so lovely. He's very articulate. How did you feel about this episode?
Nancy, I loved how this episode unfolded because you got a bit of a history lesson about the arts in Las Vegas that helped influence and develop this fantastic artist who has created works that helped shape Las Vegas. So it's a beautiful synergy and energy with Tim Bavington. It's wonderful.
Among the different aspects of this episode, we have an interview with Roger Thomas, in his own right, an amazing person who was for many years a director of design at Wynn Design and Development, and is the principal of his own Roger Thomas collection. And the way he and Tim connect is really beautiful, don't you think?
It's really lovely.
They just complement one another when they talk about art, the importance of art and design, and where it fits in Las Vegas, and how some of this work has really transformed Las Vegas.
Tim Bavington earned a master's in fine arts from UNLV in 2000. His early postgraduate work involved comics and contributions to The Simpsons television show. In the early 2000s, Tim introduced the musical scales of the guitar into his artistic practice. His artwork has continued to evolve with its connection to music, and his exhibitions throughout the United States have received high acclaim. His work is part of collections at museums across the country. Tim created a major commission called Pipe Dream for Symphony Park at the Smith Center for the Performing Arts here in Las Vegas. Each pipe in this beautiful and colorful sculpture represents a note in the classical masterpiece Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland. Tim currently serves the UNLV community as a professor of art. Tim is proud to be of an increasing number of alumni that are continually defying expectations about the arts at Las Vegas.
It was a good year for Las Vegas when Tim Bavington arrived in our fair city in 1984 from London to join his father. He then found his way to the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, where he earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in 1990. Fortunately for us, he returned to Las Vegas in 1995 to begin his studies at UNLV, having been attracted by the talents and focused vision of the remarkable Dave Hickey and his brilliant mate, Libby Lumpkin. These were magical years in the studios of the College of Fine Arts at UNLV, and the leader of the talented band of students creating this triumphant alchemy was this brash and friendly Brit named Tim Bavington. He was awarded his MFA, Master of Fine Arts, at UNLV in 2000. Already a professional, Tim financed this education as an artist on the iconic Simpsons animated and hyper-successful syndicated and culture-changing televised serial comic book. Tim was always enchanted by two art forms, rock and roll and painting. Challenged by Hickey and Lumpkin to define his passion and stake his claim in the painting game, Bavington married both loves in a cerebral, inventive, sexy, and oh so beautiful new image. A structure really, and an imagery so basic, so elemental, so integral that it would indelibly change the landscape of two-dimensional space exploration and mark his own era of contemporary image making as completely unique. Like many pivotal moments in the history of art, Tim linked mathematics with art and physics with expression in a way that was so fundamental it would affect the world it entered and influence a new generation in both image and palette and in thinking. Hickey is called Bavington's iconic paintings Neon in the Mist, a poetic tribute to the Las Vegan who would enter and continue to participate in the international pantheon of influential artists from his studio in the neon capital of the world. Bavington is the most recognized, influential, and collected artist in our city's history.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted today in our spotlight episode on great artist Tim Bavington, who's both a professor at UNLV and an alumnus as well. We're delighted for this episode to have an interview between Tim and a great friend and colleague, Roger Thomas. Roger was the director of design for Wynn Design and Development, and he's continues to be principal of the Roger Thomas collection. Tim perhaps doesn't need more introduction because we're going to be hearing all about him and all about his work, accomplishments, and some of the future projects that he has coming up. So I am so pleased to welcome both of you to this program and to this special episode focusing on Tim Bavington. Let me ask you, first of all, how did the two of you meet? I know when I was corresponding with Roger, it came up that Dave Hickey, who's another luminary in our world, who taught for a long time at UNLV, introduced the two of you. How did that happen?
Well, Nancy, thank you for asking me to join this conversation. There's no one I'd rather talk to or about than Tim Bavington. The meeting started when Elaine Wynn and I attended a lecture of Dave Hickey's in Seattle. We were in Seattle meeting with Dale Chihuly about the commission for Fiore di Como, the great ceiling of the lobby of Hotel Bellagio, which we were then creating. And we had a few moments and ran to this lecture at the Seattle Museum, and I'd heard Dave before, but being with Elaine was so infectious that we went up afterwards and introduced ourselves to Dave. Elaine wanted to get to know him. She was so impressed with the lecture and delighted to find that he was teaching at UNLV in her own backyard and wanted to start a relationship. And in that conversation, he brought up Tim's name and said, you should be meeting and collecting great artists that are in my program. And some of the best are, he named a few, and Tim was one of them. And so he connected us and we reached out and I met Tim, and I immediately collected a work of his that is somewhat similar to the one that is behind Tim now. That first work I collected was called the Fibonacci Code, and still in my collection. In fact, it is hanging in my home in Las Vegas right now. Is that the way you remember it, Tim?
Yeah, let me see, I'm not sure. Well, when did we meet? I don't know when we met, but I can tell you my story about how I ended up at UNLV too, because that leads into how we got together. And I had moved back to Las Vegas because my dad had moved there, and I had moved back from Los Angeles where I'd been working in the entertainment industry. And I would go back to LA to see my old professors. One of them, Jeremy Gilbert Rolfe at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. And I was back there in '95 showing him paintings or pictures of paintings. And Jeremy said, you got to meet Dave Hickey. And I happen to know who Dave Hickey was because he was writing a column in a magazine called Art Issues. And that was run by, with some of the professors or a couple of the people publishing it, worked also at UNL, at Art Center. And so I came back to Vegas in '95, sort of excited that Jeremy said I should meet Dave. And when I met Dave, we met in a cafe, which since we're talking, a lot of the UNLV folks will know the Cafe Roma across the street. Dave was teaching. He said, let's go meet over at Cafe Roma. So I went and met him over there, '95, and told me then, you should teach at UNLV. And you should come to UNLV, and you should, I teach there, and you should enroll in the MFA program, which at the time was amazing because you got a studio, an MFA, you get a studio year round. I was working in a garage previously at my dad's, which in Vegas gets very hot in summer. So I was able to have a studio year round and study with Dave Hickey at UNLV at the master's program. So I was there when Roger came back, having obviously met Dave with Elena. I didn't know that story how they met. But
so it was about probably around 98 that we met, maybe 97, because the design of Fiore di Como started in about 96, I think, just about that time. And I think we met shortly after. My home that you delivered the painting to right after I met you was completed in 97. So it was sometime around then.
So I had, at that point, I'd actually done something that led to the work that you see behind me and became the work I knew, which is in the MFA program, you have a midway show, which now I'm part of that program. You have a midway show as an MFA, and that determines whether you're going to matriculate on and actually graduate as an MFA student. But I started in 96, and by around 98, right in there, that's when I had my midway show. And so I was already making paintings, which it started to become pretty decent. But at that point, I'd been studying abstract painting for about 10 years. That's when I started more or less around 88 when I was at Art Center. So it was really, I was about 10 years in and started to make a couple of decent paintings while I was at UNLV in the master's program. And that's why, the other students were doing the same. We had a really neat atmosphere. And so that's why Dave was excited when he would go around. But, he would go do those talks and he'd come back with the next semester or two, another student, some green-haired Japanese student he saw out somewhere in the middle of Utah. He's just figured, you got to come to UNLV. What are you doing out here? And that's, one of my friends, Seuss Machida, who's been a friend forever now, and he shows up. Dave's ventures around the country always led to something happening back at UNLV. It was a lot of fun at that time.
There was a wonderful exhibition at the Nevada Museum of Fine Art while I was still serving on the board of that institution when it was at the galleries at the West Sahara Library for a time. And Dave's wife, Libby Lumpkin, was the director of the Nevada Museum of Fine Art in those days. And one of the very greatest shows that we mounted was called Diaspora. And it was about all of those students that Dave talked into coming to UNLV, being in his program during this extraordinary Renaissance-like fluorescence of the painting department at UNLV. I've now collected or placed works by every single one of the members of those students, much to the benefit of the collection of the Nevada Museum of Fine Art, for which I acquired several pieces, now hanging at the Smith Center, I'm happy to say. But also for my own collection and for the collections of friends. We were all very enriched by that period. I'm about to hang my Seuss painting here in California in about 2 weeks with another one of those great alums, Sean Hummel, who will help curate the collection when he arrives next month.
Oh, that sounds like an incredible time at UNLV. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. It's wonderful to hear about, that group of students in that era. I just remember the energy that was in that painting department particularly. There was so many wonderful things happening. Tim, here's a question for you. What are the influences behind these amazing color, creations and these environments you create? What are your influences? What inspires you?
Well, I was, my interest is in abstraction, obviously, in particular, color field painting, and really it was really about non-representational painting is where I started. So In particular, especially when I began making the sort of paintings that were to evolve into what I am known for today, I was interested in hard edge abstraction, which is the classic, and West Coast, American West Coast abstraction too, which is it's characterized by a show. There was a classic show, 1956, at Los Angeles County Museum called Four Abstract Classicists. And so these were painters named John McLaughlin, Lawson Feitelson, Helen Lundeberg, and Frederick Hammersley. And these were painters that practiced the kind of, you know, there's the birth of the cool, the West Coast kind of jazz, but it was similar sort of cool in this kind of West Coast hard edge abstraction, which I was really interested in. More generally, I was interested in abstract as a whole, as a universal issue. And I think the same is true for color and by extension also music. These are much more universal subjects, right? In a broad sense, they're very universal subjects. So it just so happens that, you know, when I came here, my former teacher, Jeremy Gilbert Rolfe, was interested in color in particular for its complexity and its difficulty, or the difficulty that language has with color. And so there's a potential in focusing work on color that makes it somewhat elusive, and it's more sensational, which goes back to the kind of painting tradition that begins with painters like Titian and Raphael. So there's a certain string of painting that is more represented by I would say the painters that emphasize the sensual aspects of color, the sensuousness of color, and painting as experience. And one of my former teacher's biggest surprises to me when I was an undergraduate was how much he thought the Impressionists were that much of a revolution. And so what I liked early on in my sort of come from England when in the 70s, I was interested as a kid in punk music. And so I have a sort of punk attitude, but I don't want to do anything cliche or corny. So when I have an instructor and he says, and this is in the 80s, you've got to at the time of deconstruction and a heavy theoretical atmosphere, and he says the Impressionists, you know, some of the most amazing, this was one of the most significant things to ever happen in painting. So that blew my mind. The Impressionists, it's not what you would think. And so Dave also, so that led also to this concept, this rise between Jeremy and Dave. What they had in common was an appreciation for beauty, which of course Dave became known for making the subject of contemporary art, which as he began in his book, Invisible Dragon, he starts off with an anecdote that you just color, you know, contemporary art, I think you'd still almost say the same thing today. People would do, that's the subject, I don't know, beauty, no. And so in the 80s, in the 90s, that had a lot of power for somebody who thought, now this is original, this is different, this is not the mainstream of the art world or the art media world. And so that had a lot of draw for me. And Vegas too. Vegas is, in that respect, it's like Venice in America. This is one of our color cities. This is one of these places where things like color and its subversive aspects and its sensual aspects are all about the kind of experience, and that feeds into. That's why Dave Hickey would love to be here and loved it, just for its colorfulness, and that also led to this wonderful independent feeling that you can have if you're a resident, you want to do something, and you choose Las Vegas to do it.
Well, go ahead.
And experiencing Tim's paintings is truly what he spoke about. One does not need to bring any knowledge of cultural reference to them. You don't have to know about what art went before. You don't even have to share television programs or language. You don't have to share architecture or landscape. You come to Tim's paintings, and because they are an object unto themselves, the experience is about the joyousness of the color, or the mystery of the color, or the drama of the color, or all of those combined. And once you understand that they also incorporate music as a foundation to them, or mathematics, or some other existing set of integers, and you hear that music or understand that set of integers and look back at the painting, it changes the way you've experienced that particular refrain of music, that mathematical equation forever, but it also relates humanly to the experience you've had with those experiences before. When you hear the piece of music, or even if you're looking at a Tim Bavington painting and you read the title, which is usually a title of a song, and you then are hearing the music in your head while you're looking at this completely non-referential but extraordinary group of colors that have been composed. It's a completely sensory and sensual experience.
I think, and part of the idea there is this sort of democratic idea. There's the democratic idea of people being allowed to make up their own opinions. Dave was one who said that he wanted in his works he was always a defender for the voice of the viewer, the voice of the people before the painting. And that's one of the things that comes with music, and one of the reasons he would talk so fondly of popular music, because if it makes you dance, it makes you dance. And that's the attitude. You don't, no matter the complexity, no matter what the historical aspects of it, you don't need to know that I'm a painter and the history that goes back to Titian or Raphael. You don't need to know how that lineage of painting goes back through the years and the decades and the centuries to know whether you like a work of. And I would always say, anyone can tell a good or a bad abstract painting. My partner, an art historian, would probably have issue with that. But you can tell a good one and you can tell a bad one. If you like it, you like it. And that too is a sort of there's a democratic ideal in that, and an attitude that goes, and it fits well with Las Vegas too. You'd hear anecdotes when you come to Las Vegas that. You can go in anywhere as long as your money's green. Everybody's money is green. You can go anywhere you want as long as you got that. So, it's accessibility to any of the, to be able to gamble. You didn't, you just had to come in and plonk your money down, and you can go to any show and you do whatever it's just that kind of permissive atmosphere that also is it's kind of a populist ideal, I suppose.
And a capitalist one at the same time. It's what I love about living in Venice and Las Vegas. I see great similarities. They're both places that developed as the place you went to get away and entertain yourself as best you could, and found people who were more than willing to cooperate.
Yeah, super cool.
When I came here 4 years ago and I got to know Tim a little bit, but I guess it made such a huge impression on me, the kind of imprint, the kind of influence he has on Las Vegas art life. Going to the Smith Center, you see the beautiful piece. I have one myself in my office, being influenced by the beauty of the work. But it's I guess I'd love to find out about how did this happen, and how does the work of Tim Bavington help shape the cultural and artistic life of Las Vegas in its way?
Well, I think one of the ways that happened is Tim was collected by everyone who was collecting. And so he became a common vocabulary, and those collectors not only collected Tim so that they could live with the beauty of his objects, but they all came to know Tim personally in a very personal way. And so he was an opportunity to have a really great discussion about things that they were caring about, and to introduce Tim to people who maybe weren't collectors, but that Tim would influence in conversation. And then when Tim was created, the icon that is at the Smith Center, which is called Fanfare for the Common Man, and at the same time called Pipe Dream, he elevated the kind of conversations that were going on. And I think even before that, because Tim was early collected by the Museum of Modern Art, he included a national conversation about creativity, collecting, and art making for the Las Vegas public, which was not heard before in the Vegas Valley.
Very interesting.
I think, wouldn't you say, Roger, that, it's also, I mean, I don't want to give myself a lot of credit. I would say I happen to be here at a time when the contemporary art landscape in Las Vegas, it grew in and of itself, and it wasn't, and Roger would know, because he's been around here long enough to see that this was a time when, I mean, we saw with Wynn, and we saw a contemporary art go into make its appearance in hotels, and one of the things that Roger was a part of was changing the landscape to where, and Roger probably explains this better, that it was the Wynn hotels and Roger that introduced rich and luxurious environments to our casinos and the design, and there's something to making people feel. Roger, you'll explain this better, right? If you make people sit like they're in a rich environment.
If I could jump in real quick too, because Roger, and this is largely also a thank you. I can remember the days, I moved here in '92, and we would look at casino billboards, and you would say, oh, here's the buffet, or here's this. Then suddenly, with the Bellagio, you had Picasso, and it was art on the billboards in front of it. That's what was the feature. So, it's a thank you, because the spotlight was moved away to a luxury item and to the world of the visual arts being the destination and an entertainment in a way also. So yeah, it's wonderful. Please tell us about what that was like doing that.
I think the real credit, I mean, yes, I was there. I think Tim saying that, he was just there is like, I was just there the day Steve Wynn hired me to design his hotel, casino, resorts. You have to be somewhere to get the opportunity. But the guy who makes good on the opportunity has to be the right guy too. So it's not just that Tim was there, it was that it was Tim who was there. And so I think it was, it really, for me, it was the conjunction of Steve and Elaine Wynn. I'd known Steve and Elaine Wynn since I was 13. But they were at the primed point just before the Bellagio, when the Mirage was becoming the phenomenon that the Mirage was. The very first bit of Steve and Elaine's collection, which focused on Impressionist art, by the way, was bought and housed in a private salon privé, the first of its kind in Nevada, at the Mirage. And Dave got to come and see it, and a lot of other people got to come and see it and talk about it. And so that was the reason we included plans for a major gallery at Bellagio, which I had the pleasure of designing. But it's also the reason there were Robert Rauschenbergs behind the desk. Steve and Elaine were then friends with Robert Rauschenberg. It's why there's a Dale Chihuly ceiling. Steve and Elaine had become friends with Dale Chihuly. And so I kind of got, I was trained in art history, never in design. I never studied interior design formally. I never studied architecture formally. I simply did it. but as a student of the history of design and architecture, and as an art history major, what I brought to the table for Steve and Elaine was constant discussions about how I wanted a room to feel like the fuzzy edges, but brilliant color of a joyous Rothko, or how I wanted to have the drama of a Franz Klein painting in the room, and and I would bring those paintings with me to talk about, because that's the way I saw the big idea for an interior. I didn't say, well, I'd like to use chintz and I think it should be pink, or I think it should, that's not the way Roger created environments. I always was inspired to create something by something that had inspired me. And so that's really how it started. And we got to expand on that program with WIN. Since then, since the beginning of WIN, I've included a Tim Bavington painting in every single hotel project I have ever designed. So, he's like my good luck charm. I'm thinking about, where's the Bavington gonna go? We're talking millions of square feet on any of these projects. But one of the things that kind of kept me focused and centered is I always knew I was going to put a Bavington in it. Where does the Bavington go? That said, his Bavington for WIN moved after it went where it was going. And we bought a painting of Tim's that was too big for WIN. It was a 5-panel piece called Full Fathom 5. And it was too large. So I called Tim and said, can I make this 4 panels of Full Fathom 5? I'll buy the 5th panel personally. And so he gave his blessing, and that's how that happened. Started in the gallery corridor at WIN, but it now graces SW, the most successful, most visited restaurant at the hotel, in I think a better location because it's now on a walnut wall, and the walnut color is absolutely, it was going on a brown wall before anyway, but the walnut richness, the depth of color in that is pretty spectacular. And so is the minimalism of the furniture and the surrounding. It's a better place for it to sing.
I love the idea of a work of art being the luck charm in Las Vegas. That's fantastic.
So do I.
Tim, you, when I think about your art making, I think about the range of ways in which you have explored life and had comfort, it seems to me. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. But, you talked just, very casually just now about, when you were in the entertainment industry in LA and then you came here for an MFA. And I know you and I have had conversations now and again about some of the commercial work you did. So how do you glide across worlds? Because I think that's really unusual and very admirable.
That's a good question. I don't know, and I hate to say this, but I read a book once that had a scientific theory about this. The book was called The Drunkard's Walk. And so it sort of adds to a kind of, it just describes life as happening and it's sort of unfolding in a sort of a series of random events, where you bounce from one thing to another. I would never have imagined as a kid in England ever ending up in the west of the United States. And when the discussion we've been having, I just was thinking, how amazing is it that art and art history became so entwined with the growth and development of Las Vegas? Because I came here in the 80s. I came on a summer holiday to see my dad in 1980. So this is the 40th year, the 40th anniversary of my first trip to Las Vegas. And it really was before Roger and Steve went before the town had been transformed. It was, it was a steakhouse, a coffee shop, and a buffet. It was a box with slot machines in it. And the mob history of it, the rich, just how Vegas came about, and this even just the fact of it as such an unlikely place in the middle of a desert, and so I read something recently that that said something. One of the reasons that the organized crime came and opened casinos here is because they got shut out of Cuba and their operations were shut down there. I cannot imagine just how all this takes place. And I just happened to come to the States because my dad had come here. And with respect to my work, I came and I wanted to be a commercial artist. So I had, my dad's background was in car sales and auto repair and body shops. And so we come from, and my dad was a Cockney from London who left school when he was 13 to work at Brentford Football Club. I mean, he was a working man. So I was going to go to art college. Yeah, right. So it had to be commercial art. And it was there in Los Angeles that I discovered a love for abstraction and fine art. But they happened to have a class called Fine Art for Illustrators at Art Center. There was an emphasis at Art Center on a really deep, rigorous education, and you weren't going to be a commercial artist completely unaware of art history and real fine art. So I was blessed with the little intersections that put me together and put me in places that have created this. And you just got to be open-minded. And if I was closed-minded as a commercial artist to the snobbishness of the art world, I wouldn't have been interested. And many of my illustrator friends would only ever want to be illustrators. And for me, not so much. And then again, the commercial side of things, the openness to capitalism and as we were talking about, and democracy makes me a little more open as an abstract artist as well. Probably makes me sort of made me well suited for the public works I've done too.
So it's talking about public works. Would you like to talk about some of the projects that have meant the most to you? Both, in every realm, some things that have happened. And then I know you and I have had a brief conversation about some very exciting opportunities that are ahead of you as well.
Yes, that's again, another thing that is, could you have ever imagined? And who would have imagined, when I came here, there was no, although Roger would attest to this, the Smith Center was a long-term project. It was a long time in the making, long before I was brought on board to make a public work. And obviously, I learned commercial art. I was an illustrator. I never thought I would have a career as a fine artist. And certainly, and my interest being specifically painting, never could have imagined that I would end up making public work. This is also the 10-year anniversary of getting an email to work on a project for the GSA. So this was a public work, and this is something else that again, how did this happen? The GSA Art and Architecture program, it's governed by the law to spend a percentage of federal building projects on art for the public employees and the public that use the facilities. So somehow, and the way they put together a peer group of museum professionals and professionals in the arts. In this case, 10 years ago, it was for a border station in San Diego, which also meant the tenants of the building were represented in the search committee. That means the CBP and the border patrol and DHS and then there's people from Washington, the art and architect. Somehow I was selected as a finalist, and I didn't know. Every member of that group had gone through about a year of vetting, where they'd all shown up with a dozen artists, and they'd whittled it down over time. And I was a finalist apparently, and awarded a federal project for this border station 10 years ago. It wasn't actually completed. We went through design and development. It was fully designed. And then with the next congressional budget period, it wasn't funded for construction. The research from that just happened to coincide with a number of us artists, local artists, had been asked by the Smith Centre to make work for the interior. We were all making paintings, and we were all making artwork for the collection to show in the Smith Centre, because they were doing such a wonderful job of asking local artists. They wanted to represent the local art scene, which by that time had become something that had matured and was worth collecting and putting in this this performing arts centre for the public of Las Vegas. And they asked me to paint a mural on a back. They thought, well, we've got this other project, this outside park, a backdrop to an outdoor performance centre in the park, which would be this mural. And in looking into that, I had to look at how public works and how would you maintain a painting outside in the weather and the brutal climate of Las Vegas, and have it last over time and be able to maintain it over time. And a painting would be very difficult, even if we did. So I happened to have done this research for this public work, which wasn't constructed in San Diego, but I thought, you know, this might be a nice idea for the Smith Centre, and I brought it to them. And I said, because the back of the wall, there was no plan. You could see the back of the wall from the hotels and across the railroad tracks in downtown Las Vegas. You could see it. Well, my little idea, I thought, well, you know, you can see both sides and you get a 360-degree experience. And so it grew from that. They were open to it and okayed it, and there you go. And I since have gone on to do public works in other places. I did a federal project that was completed in 2013 for a building in Portland, Oregon. And of all things, the federal project that began 10 years ago, I'm working on now. And it's the reason I'm on sabbatical, because that big federal project, it's the completion of the work that began 10 years ago that wasn't funded for construction. So, long story.
That's quite a story. It's beautiful.
Yeah, so.
That's beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't covered today? I mean, we could be here for hours. Let's be clear about this. You're both so fascinating, and your colleagueship, your deep artistic and human friendship is a beautiful. It's just beautiful to hear about it, frankly. And what else? Is there something else that you'd like to talk about today?
I think one of the other great influencers that Tim inserted, talking about being at the right time at the right place, into the Las Vegas environment that changed the way Las Vegans perceived not only art and art collecting, but I think they perceived themselves differently, because the collections that I was involved with for Tim at the time that this happened were really in my home, in more private parts of projects. But the huge painting that went into Spago at Caesar's Forum, I think really got Tim's name on the tip of the tongue of who did that? What is that? And I know that it was a big reason for collection and interest, and a big reason in Las Vegas seeing themselves as more grown up than they'd been before in terms of art entering their lives. So I think that was a highly influential moment in the history of arts in Las Vegas, in a restaurant. But it had the scale and the verve to really grab attention and be memorable.
I think it did, and it's one of the interesting things. Art and design have really transformed, as you said, how people view themselves when they're here in Las Vegas, and they've changed the perception of what Las Vegas is. Over time, this has really developed how Las Vegas is perceived, and when you come here. So for most of the majority of my career has actually taken place elsewhere. So from exhibiting in other cities and countries, the people that come here, then what you feel that when they come here is it's not quite as alien. There is contemporary art and culture everywhere you go. And so you come here, when you find yourself amongst it in Las Vegas, it doesn't feel like it's that crazy, a different alien place. It's something actually quite familiar with the the language of sort of high culture and you know, how places in New York, it just feels like, it doesn't feel like it's, well, it's not the Vegas you expect to come to anymore. It changed what people would expect when they come here, what they experience. That's been really amazing to be part of.
It has for me too, because I grew up in Las Vegas, and I never liked it. I was fortunate enough to go away to school for both high school and college before I returned somewhat accidentally to a career in Las Vegas that had a trajectory that I couldn't have foreseen. I've always been leaving Las Vegas after this project for about 40 years. But the reason that I stayed and worked with Steve was just what Tim said, and that was Steve wanted to change the way Las Vegas looked, and more importantly to me, the way Las Vegas felt. He wanted to give it an authenticity it had perhaps never experienced before. It had never been anybody's big idea to make it real. It had been everybody's big idea to shut out the sunlight and keep you in a box, throwing quarters in a machine. And that's not the way Steve Wynn saw quality entertainment for great guests. He thought you had to elevate the experience and engage them on every single level you could. And he saw good design as one of the most important marketing tools, and it was a natural progression for that to become good art is also a great marketing tool. I mean, that is another magical thing about Venice. All of the great institutions of Venice, be they governmental, religious, or private, understood that what kept everybody interested and kept them in the building and kept them going was this extraordinary experience of design, but more importantly, art.
Well,
and Las Vegas has become the same.
Yeah. To hear about this transformation through art, in a certain sense, and design, it's very exhilarating. We are so pleased and honored, really, to have had a chance to have this conversation with you both, and wish you well. We're excited about this episode, focusing a spotlight on Tim Bavington as a professor at UNLV, as well as an alumnus and a world figure in art. So thank you so much for your wonderful comments. So much to think about, and I'm so glad we were able to share it with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to join you and for allowing me this delightful time with Tim and you both. Thank you.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for asking me to be part of it.
Louis and I are thrilled. We're thrilled to be with you today. Thank you.
And we can't wait till the next pieces and the next art in Las Vegas. How wonderful.
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about something that Tim is working on now that I'm very excited about, and I won't give it away, Tim, I promise. But I love the part of him hearing in a revolutionary way by someone he didn't expect this information from, that Impressionists were really important. And Tim has been, and I have been talking a lot about a guy who arguably caused Impressionism and a great influence that he's having on Tim's work. So we'll look for more dynamic, art historically transformative works in the future.
If you know what, if you like, we can talk about that a little bit, Roger, because the chair of my department has written an essay about it and it's been published.
Ah, okay.
So,
let's hear.
Yeah, so Marcus Tibbin wrote a piece about a sort of side project. Although to me, there are no side projects. It's integral to my work, but what you wouldn't expect me to be painting is anything like a 19th century still life. And so I've been working on some paintings which are essentially 19th century still lives, scaled up to about 400%. So Marcus had written an essay about that. So yes, there's some unusual work that's, I mean, I come from the land of eccentricity in England, and now for something completely different isn't, unusual to me. It's something I might even try. And so there are things you would not expect me to do that are in the studio. But, you know, as a friend of my partner's, Wayne Thiebaud, says, you know, he makes a lot of bad ones. And that's what we do as painters. We make a lot of bad ones. You'd be surprised how much work is done in the studio that doesn't make it out. And so, you know, Roger's enjoyed seeing this work, and maybe one day it will see the light of day, and hopefully not too soon.
I remind you, Tim, I've been promised pick of the litter.
Yeah. Roger's going to get the first couple.
Roger, you've absolutely earned the pick of the litter there. I think that's a charming way to say it. Well, we're really intrigued, Tim. We've got to find out more about this. But thank you for sharing that, you know, that news about some future directions that you're exploring.
You're going to have to create some other bad work, because this is not that.
It's not that bad, I know. Thanks,
Well,
Rob.
listen, thank you both so much. It's been such a treat, really.
Thank you, Nancy.
guys.
Thank you, Louis.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Nancy, what a fantastic episode, and what a brilliant artist, and our very own Tim Bavington.
You know, Louis, he talks about the public art he's created for society. And he talks about a little bit about art and democracy. It's very invigorating. It's very moving to hear that.
It's so wonderful, Nancy, these artists that transcend any specific category. Like, I love how he interplays between commercial work and fine art and abstraction, and now he's even a move into realism a bit. So it's really wonderful to see our alumni and the places they go.
You know, I was thinking while he was speaking, and while he and Roger were speaking together, about the growth that Tim exudes.
And Nancy, Roger's comment has stuck with me, just that a work of fine art, a painting, can be a good luck charm for a casino. That is just so wonderful to think about, the possibilities of that.
The next time I'm in one of the hotels and I gaze, you know, proudly and lovingly at one of Tim's works, I'm going to remember that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. This is UNLV Arts Worldwide. We are reaching from Las Vegas to the world.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.